What's up? So we got the practical data community lunch and learn. It's actually not really a lunch and learn because
Breakfast
time
and
better here. Yeah, Cedric's over in type A right now. It's 8 a.m. my time. Matt, I'm guessing it's probably 10 a.m. your time there. So anyway, yeah, we got Cedric Chin. I've been following his blog CommonCog for many years. I think it was some of the most intelligent writing and thinking I've found on the internet. And Lord knows I've combed the earth for smart things, and yeah, Cedric's become a friend and somebody I really look up to. And we got Matthew Mullins here. Yeah, I normally at the community event, I feel like the times of throwing people off, we'll just have I guess an impromptu podcast talking about all kinds of things. But yeah, Cedric, I guess do you want to give a quick intro?
what do I do? I write a blog. I sometimes consult for businesses if I find the consulting arrangement interesting. And the whole shtick for CommonCog, which is the website that I write, for the longest time was basically if let me experiment with business idea in the businesses that I'm involved with, or if you're a friend and we have a consulting arrangement, let me try out the idea in your business. Usually after I've tested it a bit, and I've vetted it a bit, right? And then, dog. And then, if either it works or it doesn't, and if it works, usually it makes a lot of money for the company involved. And then I go write about it and say like, it works. Here's what I found out. Here's how challenging it was. Here's the things that nobody tells you when you're actually trying to put it to practice. And a couple years ago, I think Joe and I had communicated on LinkedIn for a while, but I never felt like anything useful to say to his community because it's the data community. What do I know about data, right? And then about 2 years ago, I did some work for Colin Breyer. Specifically, Colin Breyer is the second shadow after Jeff Bezos. Bezos' second shadow after Andy Jassy, who was the current CEO of Amazon, and he wanted someone to explicate the WBR process, which he had written about in a book that he published in 2021 or 2022, I think. And it turned out that he had written about the Amazon's data practice, the weekly business review. In that book, it was chapter 6, and it was not enough to actually put it to practice. And so he wanted somebody else to go and explicate it and make artifacts for the consulting clients that he was talking to. And so then I went down a rabbit hole, and at the end of it, I contacted Joe and said, I actually do think I have something to say to your community now. Yeah, so that's the short of it.
It was around control charts too, I believe, right? So
yes.
So then which is one of
Blast from the past.
Yeah, but that's also one of those tools that I think not a lot of people appreciate the simplicity and the power behind them. You draw lines, and then you see where the other line goes. It's amazing.
Yep. It's incredible.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. I actually taught it to. Yeah, some of it's on the NDA. So I've taught it to a friend's fairly sizable company, and they had great results out of it. And the thing that I want to emphasize is just that the technique is really old, but the thing that is designed to do that it does really well is just introduce business people to this concept of exceptional and routine variation, right? And so it's not perfect. The technique is really not perfect. There are some forms of data that it just can't handle. But just introducing this idea of maybe we shouldn't freak out on a change. Maybe it's just routine variation. Maybe it's perfectly fine for sales to go down by 20% month on month. That's a huge deal. Pretty much everybody that I've taught this to and got it to apply to the companies have said that it's changed the way that they operate their companies. Yeah. Yes. Understanding variation.
Yeah. One of those old tomes that seem to get a lot of attention these days, but that's cool. I guess we can open up the questions, or I can ask you questions either way, or you can
just riff
for an hour. I don't really care.
Yeah.
I guess kind of stepping back, you got on my radar because you write, really smart and thoughtful things. Like, how did you get into, I guess what motivated you to write in the first place? I know you kind of mentioned that you had this experience of working with businesses. You wanted to write about your experience and think about it, but like you're very widely read. I think that you read even studying people like Munger, and this
Yeah.
and home here. Like why study I guess now deceased executives and all that. So it seems like there's a lot of things you could pay attention to.
I originally started CommonCog to learn content marketing, and sort of like the background there was I always wanted to start a business because of a misguided belief when I was young during the Asian financial crisis that if I own my own business, I can never be fired. Ha ha ha! We know that's not true. And first I was really optimized for startups, and straight out of university, because I wanted to get good at running businesses. I went to university in Singapore. There was this bond thing. Basically, it's a genius deal. If you go to university in Singapore, every foreign student accepted to one of the local universities gets a tuition grant, which is basically a 40 to 50% discount on tuition fees. In exchange, the Singapore government bonds you to work for any company in Singapore or any company registered in Singapore anywhere in the world, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm bonded. I have this 3-year bond. I want to learn business. And so what I did was I came up with this strategy to go work for a company in Vietnam. And the insight behind that was that if I'm going down the startup path, right, what does job security look like? And I couldn't articulate it then, but I think the basic idea is that if you have if you can get hired easily when you leave your prior job, you have job security. And at the time, there were a lot of startups in the region, right? But there were only a small group of people who could, we call them fixers, I guess, like basically people who go to these uncomfortable developing countries in Southeast Asia and run the office and figure everything out, right? And startups needed people like that, and there was a very small set, and I was just one of them. So my first job out of university, I helped this Singaporean company build an engineering office in Vietnam. And at the end of that, I knew that I sucked at sales. I knew nothing about marketing, and I wanted to learn marketing. And so I started CommonCog to make sense of a lot. Initially, it was just to learn content marketing, and then I got good at it. And then I was like, okay, let me make sense of a lot of the business things that I saw in the region that just did not seem to make sense to me. And when you start trying to level up on business, it's not very long before you stumble on Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and the huge amount of wisdom that they figured out amongst the two of them over the last 60 years or so. Yeah. So that's the short of it, of like why CommonCog is. It's basically a greedy algorithm to try to get me to be better at business, and I will take whatever seems like it's proven, like it's useful, and if there's somebody who has put it to practice and I can talk to that person and then try and test it in some real world environment, some real business, then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just chase that down. So yeah, data-driven turns out to be, using data rigorously when you're running a business turns out to be a very important thing. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise indeed. Got a few new people who joined. Welcome. This is Cedric. Feel free to ask some questions. Just going through. Yeah, just I guess anything really. I'll put his blog here in the comments. But there's also
I don't have data questions, but recently you've been writing about product market fit. But I may be the only one on here who cares.
Really? Why?
That's not true. Very false.
yeah, I think that's false too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, right? Like, so I think that particular series started because I did get good at content marketing, and then I realized that there's this fundamental skill below marketing that people in sales and product, really good people in sales, product, go-to-market motions, marketing, they all have this skill, but nobody talks about this skill except maybe Bob Moesta in Demand Side Sales 101, right? Where he sort of points out that demand is itself a skill and you can get good at it. And being good at it means that you are able to detach from the product that you're selling, which a lot of people actually cannot do. And so I was like, okay, this seems to be an interesting thing that I got good at in the last 4 years or so. I can probably write authoritatively about that. I've trained people as well to get good at it, and they've gone on to like good careers in sales or marketing. But then the other thing that was puzzling is that when you sort of look deeply at product market fit and demand, you realize that there is this hole in all the theories. Since there's this guy called Theodore Levitt, he was in charge of Harvard Business Review, and he basically sort of outlined the fundamental beliefs that people have around demand, which is that demand is pain, right? So the entire sort of thing about when we talk about demand is pain, right? That comes from a 1987 book by Theodore Levitt, called, I think, The Marketing Imagination or something like that, right? And it did not explain certain types of products. So pain does not explain Facebook and TikTok and Instagram. It doesn't explain Vanguard, which is this $10 trillion global asset manager, which is causing lots and lots of people to suffer. And I was looking for, I think over the past 5 years or so, I was looking for a theory to explain, like, there's this hole, right? There's this hole, and existing demand theories can deal with demand problems after you found product market fit, but it's this black hole before you found product market fit where nothing seems to help, and it's all idiosyncratic, and people who find product market fit seem to fall into it by accident. And so when about a year ago, somebody on Twitter who seemed serious reached out to me and said, hey, I'm associated with the authors of this book that was just published, and they ran an incubator out of Atlanta, Georgia, which has a ridiculous success rate, which I can't talk about because the fund outcomes are not audited, so they don't release it. But I've seen the numbers, and I buy it. We have done ridiculously, and it's in Atlanta, Georgia, in the middle of like not Silicon Valley, right? Like, and we've done incredible returns. And then like run by one legendary computer science professor. He shut it down and he published a book, and he's kind of semi-retired. And so I read the book, and the book explained it explained the whole, right? It gave us a new theory of demand that doesn't require you to use language like pain or desire. And it also dealt with the fact that pain is not predictive, right? There are lots, you and I have lots of pains and a lot of desires that we don't act on. And so therefore, if we investigate pains, we don't have it's a crapshoot, because it's not guaranteed that if you have a pain, if a product that can solve a pain, it will lead to a good company and a good business. Anyway, so that's my spiel for like why it's super interesting, why I chose this frame, and yeah, ask away and whatever questions you have.
What do you?
And this,
Man, I know you're talking about this. What do you think about unrealized, like, pain and desire? Does that make sense?
Unrealized.
Like Matt might have pain that he doesn't realize yet, and then I make him realize that he has. Like, there's lots of people that position their product where there is
Correct.
pain that you are not aware of. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. So the theory is called deliberate innovation. It's from this book, The Heart of Innovation. Merrick points out, because so the authors of the book did a startup for 10 years and then it failed, right, with no demand. And then they began to develop this aversion. When you lose 10 years of your life, you begin to develop an aversion to language that is unhelpful. So Merrick doesn't like to use the word pain because it is not accurate enough, right? Just because you have an unrealized pain doesn't necessarily mean that after you realize it, you will act and buy a product to solve that pain. This is true. You can just look at your life and sort of, sometimes you are aware of pain, but then you don't buy anything, right? You don't act for years, and then there's no business to be built around that pain, right? So what he talks about instead is he wants a behavioral threshold to be met, where, and he uses the language, a gap in the situation. So you have real demand when a solution, when there is a situation where there is a gap, and having been exposed to a solution for that gap, you cannot not use or buy that solution. And if that behavioral threshold exists and you can prove it, and show it to him during the incubator, then he will say that you're onto something. Otherwise, like, doesn't matter what the customer says, doesn't matter what the customer, even if the customer is super excited and says that, like, oh, I want to buy, if they don't buy and they don't show this not behavior, like he's like, you've not found authentic demand, don't go down that path, don't be like me, I burned 10 years of my life on this startup that I thought had huge demand but didn't. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's like, we can keep going at it because I find that people understand this better when we walk through examples.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you talk about in the article is like authentic demand, which implies that there's like some kind of inauthentic demand.
Yes, which is the thing that he suffered, right, for 10 years.
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry, Matt.
No, I was just trying to get to this, like, there's this stuff. I mean, I agree that like there's lots of things that like we don't buy because of pain. Like no one got on Facebook because they had some pain in their life. Right. I mean, I remember when Facebook started out, like, certain things just go viral, right? Or there's some, I was wondering about this, like in terms of like authentic demand though, like in the SaaS case, right? So like if there's like a federal mandate, right? Well, there's certainly demand now, right? Is it authentic demand? Because like if the mandate changes, then the demand goes away, right? It's the same way that like at the end of COVID, all these like online meetup places no longer had demand, right? I mean, was any of that, was it, is authentic demand that thing that lasts, can be ephemeral? You can lose it, right? Yes. I mean, yeah, certainly there was demand in that window. But it was created by this kind of like really weird externality. So,
yeah, I think like when I published the piece, like 3 different readers reached out with exactly this complaint. It's really not a good name. I would have named it something else, I think. But I can see why they named it authentic demand, right? Because they went through 10 years, and so they define it as like authentic demand is when you're exposed and you're not blah blah blah, right? But yes, 100%, the situation can change, right? Their insight was just that demand actually exists in the context of the situation, and if the situation changes, then the demand can vanish, right? So when they definitionally, they might have choose the wrong words, but I think this captures an aspect of demand that existing demand frameworks don't, and that you really do have to grapple with if you're building a product, because these things do happen. But yeah, I think your point, it's not a great name, but if we can just accept the definition, which is authentic demand exists when for a product, when in a certain situation, if your exposure to the product allows you to forces you to not use the product, then authentic demand exists. So it's purposely done so that it's not coherent. It's difficult to think about because they don't want you to lie to yourself the way they did for 10 years.
Do you think that this might be multi-parted? Do you think that pain has more, and forgive me, I didn't read the article.
No worries.
Do you think pain has more staying power or has a higher ability to like grasp people as opposed to opportunity? And then kind of as a related question, having you like talk through some of this, right? There's an interesting thing as well, which is we talk about how this demand is tied to the situation, but I'm curious of I'm going to refer to it as elasticity, right? And how that pain or opportunity changes, right? Because I would imagine pain seldomly changes. Opportunity, people change their minds all the time. Like Matt made the point about Facebook, right? Like I may look at the inherent value of Facebook. Like, of course, pain is not really a factor for Facebook. It might be for some weird reason, but it's not a value for Facebook. But my interpretation of the opportunity or the benefit I might gain from Facebook could change wildly. Whereas like the pain I'm experiencing from a different situation is unlikely to fluctuate that much. Does that make more sense? Like I feel like pain is inherently more stable. I'm air quoting this, inherently more stable than opportunity is. Does that make sense? I could just be rambling.
No. It's I probably have to like redo the entire summary in this call because
I apologize if you're rehashing.
No.
Your response, Cedric, is go read the article. That is a completely acceptable response.
Yeah, but it's useful to to rehash the article as well, right? Because I find that people understand faster when there's a back and forth, right? So it's actually useful. It's just I had to take a step back to sort of figure out like how do I start without doing the full summary, because we can do back and forth. So I think the first insight is that we are so captured to thinking about demand in terms of pain that we cannot imagine an alternative way, right?
Yeah.
And I try to get past this by presenting to you, to the reader, a remarkable business that just doesn't make sense from the lens of pain. And the example that I used was Vanguard, which Vanguard doesn't make sense. It took 15 years, right, for the index fund to gain traction. They had no competition.
And they're
When
like
they
the
launched,
biggest asset manager in the world.
they're like 10, they are larger than the entire VC industry combined.
Yeah.
Now, right? So if your demand framework, my point was like, if your demand framework cannot explain Vanguard, then your demand framework is flawed, right? And you cannot use pain to explain Vanguard. There's no pain. We can try to use the word.
Try.
Pain.
Yeah, you can definitely try.
But it's underpowered. Pain is an underpowered concept.
I agree. Yeah.
So after I set up this thing, right, I was like, okay, what does it even look like to talk about demand and product building when we don't have the language of pain? And so this guy, Merrick First, by the way, is like one of the pioneers in AI. He's a retired legend in computer science now. But he just so happened to start a company and that had all the science of demand, right? People were paying him $100,000 a year at the start, at the point of incorporation, to get access to some of the technology, right? And basically, I tell his story like it's like crazy. Like VCs gave him money at terms unheard of in 2006. He was asked to present to eBay. eBay was like, oh, like we think we're losing $14 million a year based on bot net fraud, right? When can you build this and how much for you? And he was like, oh, 100,000 a year. And it was like, okay, when can you give it to us, right? They never found product market fit. They never could sell. And he walked away from that experience so burnt, like going like, every expert that we hired, every marketing person, we churned through so many CEOs, thought that pain, that we had a product, that we will get product market fit, but we didn't. How can I prevent this from happening, right? So the first step that they do, the first conceptual step that they did was that to sort of observe, what are we looking at? We're looking for consumer behavior. And there is a whole body of work in psychology that explains why humans do the things that they do, right?
Yeah.
And there are two, and pain is actually it draws from a branch of human psychology that we now sort of like, it's like we do things because of certain traits that we have. Let's call this like the personality side of psychology, right? But there is since the 70s, there is also another side of psychology, which is that the way we act is based on the situation that we find ourselves in, and the situation can override our personality, right? And so like their big insight was like, what if we talk about pain and usage of products, right, in terms of situations instead of traits? So that was the first conceptual breakthrough. And then the second conceptual breakthrough, after they sort of like, okay, if you do certain things because of the situation that you find yourself in, right, then what kinds of situation will make you reach for a product versus not? And so one of the examples that they gave, and so like this is where they came up with the razor. Authentic demand for a product exists when in a certain situation, a person cannot, once exposed to that product, cannot not use the product. And so the example that I give is like, at one point in time, people did not wash their hands before delivering babies or doing surgery, right? And then because there was the miasma theory of disease, and then at some point the germ theory of disease won, and so now it's unthinkable for a surgeon to not wash their hands. It's unthinkable, unconscionable, unacceptable. There is no way they are not going to wash their hands, right? And you could say that after the germ theory emerged, that there was authentic demand for disinfectants and soaps, right? So what first pointed out to me was like, if you sort of think of it like that, right? People do all sorts of things based on what the situation demands of them, and things that prevent them from doing things are things like value system violations, or logical impossibility, or social unacceptability, right? All these things. Yeah, paradigm shifts, exactly, right? So Vanguard can be explained with this language. At one point in the 70s, pension fund managers began to realize that some of their managers were basically demanding active manager fees for index-like returns. And when they began realizing this, they started talking amongst themselves, and they started going like, why are we paying?
Why
these
are we
guys
doing so much work?
Exactly, it's a value systems violation, right? And so, why should I allocate my capital to you? I'm gonna go and seed some index funds, right? And as this slowly built, eventually there was this value system violation became social unacceptability, because now all the financial influencers are talking about index fund, right? So like the ball just kept rolling, and now it's like it is unthinkable to try to give money to an active manager for a large section of the population if you're not an investor, if you don't have the right work, blah blah blah.
Happened very substantial.
Yeah. So then after you sort of have this, I think then he was itchy, and then he started a incubator in Georgia Tech because he's like, I want to prove that this actually works, right? And he taught this to startups, and the returns are ridiculous, like, because it's very simple. If you don't meet the razor by the end of the program, they just don't invest.
Yeah. That's a very that's very easy investment strategy. Do they suggest more around? I understand the logic of the not, but are they more guiding towards creating the situation that leads to a not, or finding the not? You see what I'm saying? Like there's two.
Yes, correct.
Because
I asked them exactly that question.
Yeah, because I can see like social media. To Matt's example of Facebook, right? Social media. No one needs social media. We don't need. Like I had a running joke that early days. I understand in college has thousands of people. You can't possibly know everybody. Social media has some inherent value there. There is no pain associated, but obviously we moved past that language. But in high school, when they opened it up to high school, I used to laugh at Facebook, because I was old enough that was a thing for me, and I understood that. And I was like, there are not enough people in my high school that I need social media to connect with everybody. Like, it is completely pointless. This is stupid. Like, get off of this and interact with people in the real world, right? And so, but social media is a great example. When you were talking about other examples in terms of things that you can't describe in terms of pain, candy came to my mind. Luxury goods. There's no possible way you could describe those things in terms of, no one needs a Louis Vuitton anything, right? Like, or any pick your favorite luxury label. No one needs that stuff. I mean, maybe you have some weird compulsion that you need it, but like, I think the other really interesting one to fold into this is, like, I'm really obsessed with like cognitive biases and like cognitive and like how that interacts, because like I think, especially in today's political landscape, like hardcore manipulation of whatever cognitive biases and things that are going on. So I can understand how that would there's a dynamic between that and like the situation, and how you could probably engineer a not, right? Like,
yes,
based on those biases.
And they have found examples of that. I think the super interesting thing. So there are certain situations where Facebook, once you've been exposed to social media, right, it's a not. You cannot not reach for it. I'll give you an example. Say you're waiting for the bus, and in the past, before social media, you would have reached for a book, for some music that you maybe in a CD player, Walkman. For what else did people do before social media?
Talk to each other like humans.
Yes, read the newspaper, reopen up the bloody newspaper.
Crazy. Do nothing.
Yeah. Oh, stare at the bloody street, right? But once you've exposed to social media on your phone, like in this magical piece of glass you hold in your hand, right? You cannot not reach for it. Like, oh my God, social crap.
That's addiction at that point. Like that's
habituation.
Yeah.
Just to bring it back to data. I mean, we live in the domain of like manufactured demand, right? Almost nobody needed to do.
That's an interesting.
Right? So, there are a lot of CDOs that were like, we gotta get to do. Right.
Yes.
I mean, I remember talking to an enterprise salesperson from HP. They're like, I just sold $1 million Hadoop cluster. These guys have no idea what they're going to use it for.
Yeah.
And that was happening all over the place, right?
Oh,
and it
AI. Anyway.
Yeah. There's a lot of VCs spend a lot of money to manufacture demand.
So there is demand, because the situation right now is that there is a hype cycle, and then people feel like they need to keep up with the Joneses, right? Or they will fall behind. And that creates like a temporary not that would vanish.
It's the same thing that like Louis Vuitton. Like I need a Louis Vuitton because the other people I know are buying
Yes.
Louis Vuittons as well.
But the hype cycle, if the hype cycle ends, like the same way that Hadoop, for example, sort of went away after the hype cycle ended. Well, it didn't go away, but it's definitely not anywhere near the levels of adoption, right, that we expect. Not can exist because the situations are temporary, like in the middle of a technological hype cycle. No, I think the more interesting thing there is that actually, in the vast majority of cases, a lot of data organizations don't have a solid not because the business user is not, how should I put this? I'll just be unhinged. Most businesses don't care about being data driven, and the outcomes that they drive do not matter. I mean, you're just using data as a weapon, right? You're using data to cover your ass, right? And I have tried to. I thought originally that when I wrote about the WPR and I wrote about the control charts, right, that, people just need the knowledge and then they can solve it. No, I quickly learned that data people have no political power in the organization, and the only way that you can get this adopted in the organization is if people with power, COOs, CEOs, believe in it and then adopt it and then push it down from above. I learned this the hard way. I know all of you who have been in the industry for years probably think like, you're a sweet summer child, Cedric. And I sort of made peace with that. I don't think it's possible to push adoption of some of these techniques. Like the Amazon WBR was primarily pushed down because Bezos believed in it, right? And Jeff Wilke sort of push it through as well. Because it was necessary to run Amazon's fulfillment centers using process control. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm sure you guys can riff it, can jump in with your own examples of this. But yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. I keep hearing this time is different with AI. Joking, kind of, but. But the cognitive dissonance is interesting when I hear things about AI. Like, then one, it's it's the fourth industrial revolution or whatever, changing the world, singularity's coming in the next couple of years. 70-80% of white collar jobs will be gone, and by 2028, right? But then it's like, let's go all in on this for sure. Let's fuck it. Right? This is the direction everyone's going. Like, don't care about what happens. But if we're not going this direction, as you pointed out, there's a bit of FOMO. But this is, I think it's Hadoop, but on massive amounts of TRT and other drugs probably. But it's definitely an extreme. But I say, no matter where I've gone in the world, right? It just seems like this is the cycle right now that the only thing I can compare it to is .com, and even that it feels like it feels comparable with .com actually. So
yeah.
But of course, what the difference is that there's the void on the other side where nobody knows where this goes, right? I think that's the biggest question mark. Because with .com, it's like, we can do things faster, right? We can be connected to the internet. It'll bring us all together. Actually. With AI, the conversations I'm hearing is like, we don't know what happens on the other side. Is this?
No, that's not true. I was too young for the .com bubble, but I read a lot of history, and I remember that some of the claims during the .com bubble. I mean, in the early 2000s, I was there for the early 2000s, right? The Web 2.0 revolution, right? And there was a lot of hangover from the .com bubble about this, like the internet will bring the world together. The internet will, bring democracy everywhere.
It was a global village back then. Like I was growing up in pre-web days, right? There's utopian, like global village. We're all going to be, companies will disappear. That's what companies were, right? So it was, Yeah. So that I think in the early 90s, I felt like there was the void there, the void being like, we don't know what's on the other side of this. And then companies got involved, and then pretty soon it's just like, oh, this is like every other corporate, all the big companies run this at some point, right? So
I think this is a great sort of segue to the thing that Matt, Joe, and I mean, we were talking about at the start of the conversation, which is the engines that move markets. So there is a book, I recommend it to everyone, but most people don't read it, but it's really, really valuable if you want to sort of figure out what's going on in the current thing. Because I feel like I'm going nuts. Joe and I have read it. I'm sure you feel this, Joe. You feel like you're walking through the world and you've seen 8 up to 10 technological revolutions, right? In your head, and then everybody else is acting like this is the first one they've seen, right? So the book is Engines That Move Markets.
I'll put it in here.
And yeah,
One of the best books I've ever read. It's amazing.
Each chapter is one technological revolution. And the pitch for the book is basically this guy was a hedge fund manager and the world went crazy around him in 1999. And he was like, surely this has happened before. And he embarked on a multi-year research project to like come up with like cataloging the both not just the what happened in each technological revolution starting from the railroads, but also what returns look back and whether it was possible if you were an investor in the day to invest in the right company and win, right? And there are a number of patterns that fall out of it. The biggest one is this: every technological cycle will be filled with people who will oversell the technology and the changes to society. It's guaranteed, and you can ignore all of them, right? And the reason you can ignore all of them is because they have no choice but to oversell the technology, because if they don't oversell the technology, they can't get funding, and then the huge capex, they can't survive, right? Everybody was like this. Edison was like this. Edison was worse than Elon Musk in many ways. When he was selling electrification, he was selling the light bulb. Most of the scientists of his day, by the way, like thought Edison was a crank. And then at some point, reasonable people like Joe and like many people that you can see today will point out that the claims of these hypesters do not match the reality of the technology. The technology is starting to plateau, because of course it will plateau, right? At which point you would think that the bubble finally collapses when the claims far outreach the technological capability, but that is not what happens. What happens, the bubble only ends when liquidity changes. Either a bank blows up or the Fed increases interest rates. Something in the global macro financial environment changes, in the liquidity environment changes, and then the technological bubble ends. So right now, you see model capabilities like sort of like starting to plateau. I mean, they've been plateauing for like more than a year at this point, right? But the bubble is not going to end anytime soon. It's not going to end until we start seeing the Fed cutting interest rates, increasing interest rates or whatever. And by the way, market liquidity as measured by USM2 is higher than the peak in 2022 right now. So the bubble has a long way to go. It will get a lot crazier, right? And in many ways, you don't have to figure out exactly how the world is going to change until after the liquidity crisis happens. And then you see a whole bunch of AI startups die, a whole bunch of VCs run out of money, and their funds will die as well. And that's the signal that you should sit up and start taking notice, because the bottleneck for many of these technologies is in a social technical system. The bottleneck is always the social side of things, not the technical side of things, right? And the way things play out in a society will usually happen at the point of, it takes a while for the effects to happen. I mean, for the effects to be seen in society, and it is easiest for you to pay attention to those effects when everybody has died. So in many ways, you can sort of like just relax until the liquidity environment changes, and then you sit up and start thinking and watching very carefully, because a lot of the impacts are not predictable in advance. Like, for example, railroads led to stock markets, right? Because without time, you can't really have stock markets, but standardized time came out as a result of railroads. And then like another thing is the invention of the radio created suffrage. Like, the social impacts of technologies are never obvious in the moment. And you want to be very conservative with like what the actual impact is. And you can ignore everybody who's like pushing technology because they're all wrong. It's been true since the railroads. Anyway, sorry, that's my spiel. Please read the
it's
book.
It's interesting thinking about that in light of like the current, kind of hype for LLMs, because you've got people like Jan LeCun saying like, look, this is an off ramp to AGI. Like if we ever want to get there, like we need new models, right? Like the transformer is what, 7 years old, 8 years old now, transformer architectures. They're no longer new. Like we're not continuing to innovate. We have 10 companies all making foundation models that are, barely different from each other, right? I mean, we're like, well, Claude is marginally better than GPT, and even like LG went out and made foundation models, right? I mean, companies that you don't even think about being in this business are out there doing exactly the same thing, and there's no real innovation, but there's a ton of money just getting poured into like the same.
Well, there's iterations, right? Like reinforcement learning being put on top of the LLM to now have like kind of the current reasoning models and memory. But actually, this is a discussion I was having with somebody from Stargate, where, back to the canal example that we were talking about earlier, $300 billion in today's money was thrown into canals in, the 1860s in the UK in 1 year, by the way. That's like Stargate. Stargate's a $500 billion initiative. And I turned to my friend, this Holland Nelson, actually, who wrote a whole book on math for AI. And I was like, does it seem like we'd want to maybe try and figure out a different way of doing this into scaling transformers with more GPUs and data centers? Like, it seems a bit absurd. Now, of course, you have Richard Sutton's The Bitter Lesson, which is like, well, deep learning just scales no matter what, and it doesn't seem to matter what the models are. But I'm like, yeah, except when you have people like Jan LeCun and so forth that are saying this whole approach is sort of a waste of time if we want to get to AGI. Maybe we do need to rethink it, right? And I'm in that camp. I'm like, you can keep scaling this, but what's the cost of it? I know the cost of it. It's $100 billion. But the thing is, what I realized in that whole argument, and I was talking to this person from Stargate, is like, at that point, there's so much money involved that there's no incentive to change anything. You would be a fool to say, oh, let's do things more efficiently. We don't need these data centers anymore. There's so many competing conflicts of interest that want this to happen, that it's going to require somebody outside of that bubble to make it happen.
Isn't this a little bit some of the learnings from how big things get done, right? And so before of just like the overcommitment, the hype, like you kind of need to, in a sense, oversell what you're doing to get buy-in. And I feel like it's like moral hazard a little bit, right? Like it's like a vicious cycle of contributing to something, even though we're notoriously bad at estimating the.
Well, the crazy thing with that is, right, so the canal industry back in the day, they were all like, yeah, like canals are the only way to go. Railroads, like that's, so they fought tooth and nail against the railroad industry.
Yeah.
They lost because railroads are better.
Well,
so it goes back to the product market fit though, right? Like the railroad compared to a canal, what's the not like you're not going to use a railroad against a canal. So
You're going to get a car and F both of those. And
the valuable thing, by the way, about reading the book is that you don't get over fixated in one example. So in the canal example, the canals failed, right? But in the gas versus arc lightning, there was before Edison perfected the light bulb, there was this thing called arc lightning, right? And that in that fight, the gas producers won. They innovated and they reduced the cost of running their gas lamps to make them more efficient, and they won. And then eventually it took like another 10 years before the electric light bulb beat. And they had a capex investment that was incredibly large as well, because it was ridiculous. They had to build generators to support light bulbs. All the companies that were involved initially in that, all the Edison companies, they all went bankrupt, and then JP Morgan came in and just rolled them all up and into General Electric, which did not have Edison's name in it, and Edison did not own any shares in General Electric. And I mean, reading multiple cases of historical examples is useful, because then you don't overfixate on like one historical example. You realize that you can there may be multiple patterns in which this may play out, right? The only thing that's idempotent in all of this is that you need a true technological revolution, and you need very easy liquidity for a technological bubble to explode. And the technological bubble ends not based on the capabilities of technology, but based on the financial conditions around that bubble, right? And once you know to look at that instead of the underlying technology, like you don't have to speculate about like how much it takes, or Stargate's really expensive. It's okay. Like LLMs will through blood, sweat, and tears become more efficient when the liquidity cycle changes, right? And suddenly money costs something. Well, we've been in like a zero interest rate era for a very long time. So God knows if we can continue longer. But smart people, Stanley Druckenmiller and others, believe that it can't go on forever. And financial conditions will force technological change, as it has in every single technological bubble since the canals. So it's, in some ways, you can sort of take a step back and watch markets, because markets will shape technology. And I think this is the big takeaway for like why investors, the irony is that investors really are better at understanding business sometimes compared to operators. We like to think that we understand how to run businesses, but investors get to see a lot more examples. And I think the danger that we have as technologists is that we look too much at the technology and we don't look at the surrounding financial environment that enables the technology to grow. Anyway, that's my spiel.
I think it's both, though. It's not binary. So if you only focus on the financial markets and you didn't, the innovation.
You need both for sure. But I'm saying that in our this group, right, we tend to look at technology more than the financial bit. And so like we have it was very surprising to me that what causes a bubble to end is not expectations exceeding capabilities. It's change in liquidity, and he outlines the mechanism beautifully in the book. Anyway.
It is fascinating as I look at the U.S. Treasuries right now. They're still 30 years ago, about 5% almost. So which is
not budging.
Yeah, not budging, which is interesting because the Fed's just kind of holding tight, but the bond market kind of does it. And I look at the bond market. I mean, that's what I look at, just because I feel like that's those guys tend to know what they're doing. So
we get this like collective sunk cost. Like we will continue to invest in agents until we get agents, unless there's like some external factor that comes in and makes us stop.
Well, recall that happened after Zerk died, right? It was like the entire data and AI industry was on his deathbed. Then all of a sudden, ChatGPT comes out in November 2022. And it's like, holy shit, this is our savior. Let's go all in on this. And there wasn't a conference I went to in 2023 around the world where it wasn't AI this, AI that, right? Like meeting ministers of AI in countries and meeting entire government departments that are dedicated to this. And like for them, this is an investment in their well, it's an investment in investment, actually. It's an investment to get more investment into the country that we're doing modern stuff. So it's fascinating. A lot of this is in the Middle East, right? But there's just it almost doesn't seem to matter what the economic cycle is up in the Middle East. It's kind of its own force of nature.
Isn't there some justification though in chasing things, like chasing, like we'll use agents as an example here, right? Like everybody and their mother's chasing agents right now. It feels very gold rush-esque, right? But like if we just said this is unrealistic, fuck it, let it go, right? Like then we don't progress, we don't move forward. Like isn't there some inherent value in chasing unrealistic things to some degree? I'm not necessarily calling agents realistic,
like cold fusion.
Yeah, I mean, like any of these things, like we were joking in the chat, colonizing Mars, right? It seems completely ridiculous until it's not, right? And that paradigm shift to the earlier points, like the situation all of a sudden changes. Like there is some value in, frankly, getting everybody riled up on stuff and hopefully moving the ball forward. I mean, that might be. I feel like there's some weird responsibility here of like how much do we push or not push, or get people wound up and let things burn, right? Like creative destruction-esque type things.
Well, you're usually chasing where the money is, right? Like that's what happens in business a lot of the time. So just like you were saying, like people in 2022, there was a bit of a gloom, a lot of uncertainty. And it's the same thing. Like I agree with what you were saying, like about the expansion and contraction in the market that dictates a lot. And it's more about like the sentiment of investment rather than the reality of it. Because we were like, people were really worried about interest rates in 2022. And then there was a lot of worry that a lot of the financials were really overvalued. The prospects for the future were really gloom. And then all of a sudden, NVIDIA, CPUs, AI, business boom. And then immediately there was like the kind of like a bit of a light at the end of a tunnel where, okay, this technology maybe like increases productivity a lot. So all of a sudden, all the worries that were in the market and that kept investors a bit like reluctant to put money into things, they kind of went away because like, okay, this is the next bet. I mean, this is, if this one works, I mean, it solves all the other problems. And I feel like now in retrospect, with the advantage of like looking back a bit, that's kind of what drove a lot of this. And it makes sense
Yes.
now that that's where the money is, because this is the biggest prospect. Like what other technical advantage do we have now that takes us to the next step? In 2000, we had like all the tech, right? Like internet, a lot of like
Yes.
hope in a more connected world. And I feel like the hope now is just massively increased productivity. And for an owner in a company or for an investor in a company, that's a pretty asymmetric bet, right? In the sense that you can have a huge payoff if some of these things work out. And then obviously like a lot of money flows there. And if a lot of money flows there, then there's investment. That's the industry that grows.
I have a thesis that engineering innovation happens under constraints, and currently we're running unconstrained. Right, like the real innovation happens when there's the collapse. When you're like, so I've been in tech forever, so I remember like when we had 10 megabyte hard drives, and that constrained like how tight you had to write code, right? And like we complained that like as hard drives and memory got bigger, like people didn't have to write careful code anymore, right? We kind of got unconstrained. The same thing happened with like the cloud, right? And when you have just like unconstrained money flowing into this, like when people are like, oh, we're gonna build these crazy data centers out in the desert, right? Like there's no pressure to figure out like how can we make these models smaller. There are alternative innovations to do that. Like they're just going to continue kind of like down the easy path. I think constraints create a lot of innovation.
Yeah, and a lot of the big companies were created in like kind of like the downswing after just because of that, because the people stuck around and they built things. But a lot of the money, so like, because what's a startup, right? Like you need money, like you need to hire people, you need money to do things. Like, and in a down economic environment, you really have to be more nimble. You really have to, it's not necessarily that it's an expansion of the economy, is that a lot of dedicated people work with less resources under more constraints and they create stuff. But the hopes, the companies, the investments, all of that, they usually happen in a boom when there's a lot of money. Because what happens with investors, they have a lot of money. If the prospect is that they can make more money by investing because the future is bright, they don't want to sit on the money, right? They want to like put the money to work. When there's a bit of like uncertainty, there's like, I don't know, interest rates are pretty okay now. This is really safe. I got like a 5% here. Do I really want to, like, how much of my assets do I want to risk investing in an environment that I consider or they consider, like it's not that prone to giving a return.
There's a very
That's why it's a lot of psychology in investment. It's like, okay, it's whatever the mood is. It doesn't. Interest rates don't really matter that much. They matter, but it's just like what's the attitude, right?
There is this interesting the way that I'm trying to think about this, right? So I don't allow myself to have a lot of the opinions that maybe like that we're having in this conversation. I try not to. Sometimes I have them, and then I'm like, don't think about it. What I'm trying to figure out actually is like, what is, if you are running a business or you're in a business context and you want to, in this hype cycle, figure out what actually works and then apply it without wasting too much time on the useless stuff. That's what I care about, right? And the frames that I use is just targeted to this. Then what are some of the invariants that I can guarantee to use AI properly? So I have a thread in the CommonCog forums that is basically AI field reports, where everybody just collects real usage of AI. No hype, no complaints, just actual reports of usage, right? And I think two things have fallen out of it right now. So one is the attitude that I have is very pragmatic. Like, don't read hype and speculation, just figure out like what currently works and then like go off on that and don't hold any opinions outside. Two things that fall out of it. One of that is that the use cases for which AI is really good at right now is taking some form of text and then transforming that text. So example of this would be I use a speech to text model. I speak to the speech-to-text model, and then that gets fed into a large language model with a prompt, and that rewrites the transcript of what I just said. And the reason this works very well is because like we are quite bad at speaking our thoughts because we do ers and ahs and we double back on our thoughts. But large language models are capable of taking existing text and converting it into like a better format. So that's like one example. The other thing that I think is really useful, and I urge people to go look at it, is that there's a branch of military research called cognitive systems engineering that emerged in 1987 onwards. So it's like 30 years of research into how to use automation to achieve crazy things, or like to achieve good things, right? In high stress environments without the humans blowing something up accidentally. And this is a very rich area of study, which I highly recommend digging into, because they have dealt with automation far earlier than all of us, right? Like the Aegis cruiser, the missile automatic targeting systems, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of principles in that field that are actually applicable to design if you're designing AI systems today. And the principle is basically you want to design a joint cognitive system. That's a technical term which you can Google for. And the invariant in that system is not the AI or the technology which always improves, but the human being. And so whatever principles exist in that field are built around the limitations of the human brain. And so therefore the principles around building automated systems and AI assisted systems are contingent on whatever, you know, affordances the human brain has. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Like one is like looking at what is good right now, assuming that it doesn't improve AI models. And then the second thing is digging into joint cognitive systems and cognitive system engineering and copying the principles from it. And I have actually a really 2 links for you that might be helpful that people share in the forum related to this. I think you might find it very interesting. Let's see. Anyway, you guys can talk first while I pull out the links. But I thought this would be quite useful to many people here.
To get into this forum here.
1 second. I'm looking for, yeah, it's Econ Talk. So the first thing of all the things, it's an Econ Talk podcast by, of all people, a teacher who has figured out a way after 1.5 years of iteration to build a joint cognitive system to help teachers with marking. And it's really genius. The first thing obviously is you do the stupid thing, which is you ask the large language model to mark student writing. That obviously doesn't work, right? And then what they then did was they realized that these are the 2 links. You can go listen to the podcast. The short version of what they figured out was you let the teacher give very, very harsh feedback by they read the essay and then they speak very harsh feedback to a speech-to-text model, and then that's automatically fed into a large language model that makes it more polite, so that a high school student doesn't feel horrible. And when they started doing that, they realized that way more teachers could mark way more pieces of writing, and so now they could feed it to multiple teachers in the secondary school, the high school, and so now each student receives the writing plus the feedback, and then the large language model will say things like 3 out of 4 teachers like this paragraph, 2 out of 4 teachers found problems in this particular section of the essay. You need to improve on this and that. Like they will summarize and collate all the spoken feedback of the teachers in a very polite way. And the second thing this does is the system then goes to the teacher and says that of your students in your class, 60% had a problem with this concept. So you might want to adjust your teaching the next lesson to take this into account. And this is brilliant because it allows the teachers to do what the teachers are good at, and it allows the AI to do what the AI is good at, even assuming that model capabilities don't improve, right? And it's already in production in multiple schools in the UK, and it's saving teachers a lot of time. And this is a good example of a joint cognitive system using, by accident, I think, I don't know whether she knows joint cognitive systems as a field formally, many principles of what the military has figured out over the past 30 years. And yeah, the second article sort of outlines one of these principles, which is basically there's this thing called the automation paradox, which is that when people think about agents, the first thing they think about is like, let's just automate all the easy tasks. And this turns out to be a very bad idea, because if you only leave the human to deal with the hard tasks, overall performance would drop, because it turns out that the human needs to deal with the easy tasks to practice for the hard task. And if you rob them of their practice, overall performance at the hard task also drops. The military figured this out decades ago. And so then the question is like, how do you put the human in the loop such that they don't fall into the automation paradox? Anyway, so it's plenty of stuff to dig into. There are multiple textbooks here that you can go dig into with case studies.
Yeah. On that note too, I'm in the middle of have you read Nicholas Carr's The Glass Cage?
I don't read Nicholas Carr because my epistemic guards that don't let him through. But yeah, what's The Glass Cage about?
It's just about automation and the impacts on basically skill, right? So it goes into studies of airline pilots, for example, and actually, air travel's, it's safe, but it's also really dangerous if you have a human flying the plane. It's safe when robots are flying it. But the reason is because humans don't get enough practice at flying planes anymore or controlling them, because autopilot does most of the work. So in conditions where the pilot has to take over, they're rusty, they forget what to do, they overcorrect, and they crash the plane. This happens. And so that
no. But my reaction is violent for a different reason, which is that
as I say, it's happened no matter what you think. So it is what it is. But what's your reaction?
No, it's actually Nicholas Carr is a polemicist, right? So he just wants to write the thing that gets the most readers, right? But if you go to the source material, autopilots in airplanes is like one of the best studied cognitive systems, joint cognitive systems, right? And there is at this point over 2 decades of systems and processes that when a plane falls out of the sky, it is a unusual thing, because it really works very well to a degree that we don't appreciate. And a lot of the JCS stuff, right, is basically built on trying to get this to reliably work. Given the amount, I mean, if you think about it, given the amount of planes taking off in the world every day, right, autopilot works remarkably well, because they figured out a lot of the, like, of all the fields with automation, piloting is one of the fields that has the most use of JCS principles. So Carr should be looking at our field because we are making a lot more mistakes. We're repeating the mistakes of the military like 30 years ago, I think. Anyway.
And the book does, right? And so it goes into other examples. But I think the point is, it actually more reinforces what you're trying to say with the ACM article there, where it's, I remember the article about what you're saying about it, which is that we need the sets and the reps of the basic stuff to get good at the hard stuff, right? And I think that's what's missing right now. And unfortunately, the consequence of this current hype cycle that we're in, just the reality of it is people aren't hiring as many juniors as they were. This is, we're even going out in statistics. And so what this means is, whether the life cycle works or not, the impacts on people are going to be real. If you're a graduate right now trying to find work, good luck. Good luck to you trying to find a job. We just had a career talk yesterday about that, and it is, I wouldn't want to be looking for a job right now. But the impacts of this are real, right? So it's like employers look at the hype cycle, say, well, shit, AI is going to do all the work anyway. What do we need to hire any juniors for? Like, we can fire all of our seniors too. We don't need them either, right? They see unintended consequences of this. Like, you aren't going to have people that build that sets and reps, that build the judgment, that build the skills. And like, you got to have possibly you have a creator or a hole with skilled workers. And this is, I don't know what happens, but this.
What do you guys think?
You become skilled. Like, what do you do?
What do you say, Joe, when you give that talk? When you give that talk? No, this is something I want to hear, because I don't have a well-formed opinion.
I'm still noodling on myself. I gave a talk last week in London about this, right? It was about the, we're sort. It was called. It was the Great Pacific Garbage Patch of AI Slopware. Is what I called the talk. So, and the notion is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is, it's a result of a lot of things. But we live in a very disposable culture where we toss things out. I think 90% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are fishing nets, for example, right? But that's to get fish for people to consume in mass quantities. And like anyway, what I foresee is going to happen in software is very similar. There was a sense of craftsmanship back in the day when we built things with quality, with a sense of skill and application of that. Automation largely, it automated things. And this is where the factory concepts are breaking down when we apply it to AI, for example, right? Like what factories you and I talked about, there's at least a sense of deterministic flow and tolerances when you make a robot, for example, that aren't present in an LLM, which is very probabilistic, and you have no way to tune it. If you would tune it, you could just write an algorithm to do it and you'd be done, right? But that's the difference. So, but now, the thing is, well, okay, you can use any of the vibe coding tools, and a non-technical person can just make software, right? This poses a very interesting problem where the software is now, we used to build software from bottom up. Now we're building top down. It's like I just handed you an entire application, said, Cedric, here's your app, have a nice day. I have no fucking idea how it was written or what's in it or even what the security implications are of this thing we just built, but here you go, have a nice day, run it in your office. And so the thing that caught my attention, I'll get to the punchline in a second, but what was 2 weeks ago, the CEO of IBM said by 2028, some imaginary number, but they're like, 1 billion apps will be created from agentic AI. 1 billion apps. It's like a billion. The number of apps is like line of code. This isn't a metric that seems to matter at all. Like, what do the apps do? But the consequence of this, I think, is going to be interesting because as more and more people start deviating away or moving off of kind of the traditional way we've been writing programs, for example, or creating software. And this is the void I was talking about, where like people don't know. Like software engineers right now say, yeah, the writing code is easier than ever. I like my co-pilots. It still makes mistakes. I know how to correct them. But the void question is like, I don't know if this continues and upper management thinks that this AI can keep doing what we're doing. I don't know if I have a job in a couple of years. And this is borne out in countless conversations they have. So that's what I'm wrestling with. I don't have an answer to this yet. Is a problem. It's just why I like talking to people like yourselves, especially you, Cedric. And it's just like,
does anybody else in this group have because like the thing I grapple with is sometimes people ask like, oh, the jobs are going away. Exactly like you said, Joe, which is like, yes, maybe the impacts of AI are less drastic as the people are hyping up to be, but at the same time, enough people in business believe it such that they are not hiring as many junior engineers. So sometimes people who are in computer science programs, they're still students, ask me how they should think about their careers, and I don't have a good answer. Does anybody here have a good answer that you give to people who ask you who are junior in their careers?
I think right now there's also one other thing at play. It's a bit of like a economic contraction. So right now I work in a project that's in basically recruitment. And like the market since 2022 has been contracting quite a lot. And there's like a lot less jobs. There's a lot less investment. A lot of companies are either not hiring as much or they had layoffs. 2021 was the peak in hiring, like after 2020, after the whole pandemic thing, when they start to kick out, 2021 was the boom that was really the top of the market. And now this thing coincides, like this period of contraction, and a lot of the companies, like if you look at their outlook, right, like, and their outlook is not the best for the next few years for various reasons, whatever, interest rates, I don't know why. It's only the AI sector that's like the boom in this market. All the other companies are kind of like in a contracting cycle. So right now there's less jobs overall. And at the same time, this period coincides with the AI. So from my perspective, I'm a bit in like, I don't quite know where to put it, because a lot of companies that are hiring less are also companies that are not really like making a big bet on AI, in the sense that like, yeah, we think AI, because of AI, we're going to need more people. They just look at the cost and say, we need to cut costs because or our customers or our suppliers are coming to us to renegotiate contracts. Like there's such a pressure from everybody now to cut costs and reduce spending that it's a bit hard to distinguish, okay, how much of this is the cycle and how much of this is like the AI thing, because they're just happening at the same time.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So
But
you
it is
guys-
indeed like the situation is real. Like looking at the numbers, there's way less jobs advertised. There's way less openings. Companies are hiring a lot less. They don't want to spend that much money to promote jobs, to find candidates. So it's quite a big contraction.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like the advice that I give to juniors, and this now I wrote an article about this a few weeks ago, where I've been speaking to lots of universities, and you know, big and small too. Like some, you know, some biggest names you recognize them, but like the classes, I tell them there's two ways to look at this. One is you're graduating in a very tough job market in general. I think some of the stuff that you mentioned, Marcelo, is definitely true. Where it's, if it wasn't AI, it would be something else. AI, I think, is the only thing that actually saved the hype. You know, it created a hype cycle in what is otherwise going to be a pretty crappy environment for higher interest rates that started in 2022. It just so coincided with ChatGPT, which you know, I one of my friends, Beyonce, he's one of the guys who was on the co-creators of ChatGPT. Like it was a science project. It wasn't meant to be popular. Then all of a sudden, we're like, holy shit, that happened. Back to product market fit, Cedric. Like this
Authentic demand. You cannot not use it.
because there's no way anyone's going to care about this. So, I mean, I remember playing shit with GPT-3 back in, what was it, 2020?
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
cool. I forgot about it actually. I was like,
Yeah.
if they put a chat box for it, that's cool. But the whole thing is like, you know, if you're a company and you see all these, you don't know what to believe. I mean, you're almost being gaslit by the tech industry saying, you know, agents are here. It's Anthropic CEO, you know, said the other day most white collar jobs are going to be automated. Somebody else from Anthropic was recorded recently saying like 70-80% of white collar work is going to be decimated by 2027, 2028. If you're an executive or you're running a business and you hear this stuff, you're like, shit, okay, it's like, do I need people? I don't know. Like that's a pretty big investment. This is the conversations they have. So that's what I mean by the void. It's like you're staring off into some like dark abyss and you don't even know what's on the other side of this thing. Because on one hand, you can keep doing what you're doing. On the other hand, if this potentially saves you a bunch of money and productivity gains like all the vendors are claiming, then sure. But as you pointed out, Cedric, we've been here before with other technologies. There's always been the void. You know, I think the difference right now is this is coming for knowledge work, intellectual work, and it's also when you hear things like this will be humanity's last invention, which was the name of a book written like 10 years ago or something. It's like you hear all this shit, and you're just like you don't know what to believe, right? And so the advice I tell graduates is look, focus on the stuff you should always be focusing on. Build your network. You know, try and just hustle. You gotta learn to hustle. Treat yourself like a business. All this stuff, right? That you should be doing any time. But like the advice I tell them tactically is like get really good at using these AI tools, right? This puts you in front of everyone who's on the fence about it. And like get in and you know, do great content about it. And you know, but it's like if I would be the person who's like absolutely stellar at using these tools and not, you know, probably better than the seniors at these jobs. So but I only draw on that because this is what I did during the .com boom, which is, you know, I was actually one of the beta testers for Mosaic way back in the day. I think it was like 15 or 14 at the time, but it was like, but the whole point is like you put yourself in front of the opportunities that's in the hype cycle there. I don't think my advice is like don't sit on the sidelines. Like you go all in, you know, and so. Same with when the iPhone came out, right? If you were getting all in into mobile dev, you would have done really well, real well. But,
That's true.
yeah.
I did go all in. Well, not all in, but I did do mobile development, and it was great because you got to, well, for reasons that maybe aren't applicable anymore. But I learned a lot from the way Apple engineers structured the iOS framework. Yeah, it was basically MVCC, I think it was, and then like whatever principles you use from that, like also applied to web applications of the day, Django and Rails. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Is there anybody else who wants to?
Yeah, so the entire conversation.
Yeah.
That's Cedric. It's about like probably 11:20 right now.
I should get going, but
Yeah.
I guess if anybody else has any good answers for this, I would be all ears. Evelyn, I know that I know you usually have something wise to say about this. Do you have anything to say to a young junior engineer? Because I don't know what to say anymore.
Hi, Cedric. Thanks for calling me out. The advice I'm giving to young people, I think, has already been given in the call, which is to talk to people, because all opportunities come through people, to learn skills which will allow them to solve problems with the tools. But the big thing is to develop a reputation for someone who shows up and is kind and helpful and a little bit smart, because this is going to continue to be a good way to find opportunities. As for going deep into programming, you might want to do that if you are inclined towards a math or technical mind. But the core skill is going to be problem solving and interviewing people to find out what their problem actually is and staying on top of how the world is changing. It's a tough time to be someone who's just looking for their first job. I'm counseling a young man right now who I met through the Linux users group to become a gardener, because that's going to be a sustainable advantage. And he likes gardening. He can do digital stuff to grow his business, but that's going to be really a long time before the robots replace him.
Wow. God. Like, it's actually, wow. That's not something that you would have said even in like 5 years ago.
Well, 6 months ago.
That's smart. I mean, yeah, I'll give you an example. Like I have 2 teenage boys, right? If the timelines for AI are what all the people say it's going to be, then they're looking at a totally different world. But they aren't dumb either. They look at a lot of the jobs that their career counselors are telling them about. Like they looked at it and they said, half these jobs are automated already. What are you talking about? I'm their dad, so they have a bit of a head start on this stuff. But yeah, one of my kids, he's looking at being a dentist. And the other one is either a professional athlete or running a construction company. Of which I was like, you can have robots doing all the construction for you, assuming these things get good. Just learn to run a business is what I'm telling them. Like, if you're looking for work, you got to put your fate in your own hands, is what I tell my kids. Run businesses, learn to sell, learn to market, like stuff that Cedric had to learn. But yeah, and I think that's awesome. Like the gardening is, like I was up in Wyoming the other day, right? Which is like the most desolate state in the US. There's more antelope than there are humans there. And I look, I drive by and I see a couple of my friends who own ranches up there, and I don't even think they could spell AI. This is not on their radar at all.
That's great. I would like to live their lives.
So I'm going to call out, Joe, that the Front Range is having a beautifully wet spring.
Awesome. It's good to I just added you on LinkedIn. It's good to meet you. So yeah, Fort Collins is awesome.
My God, Evelyn, you're telling people to be gardeners. Oh my God.
Well, he
this
likes
is
gardening.
The world. It's true. But this is the world we live in now.
Business also, like if you go into that domain now, I mean, like there's probably opportunities.
I mean,
True.
I think my landscaper
and you use AI to automate a lot of things, and then you go.
Yeah.
There's a growth opportunity in doing the landscaping for the Anthropic people, the OpenAI people. But yeah, Jesus, wow. I'm gonna tell my parents that, but they love gardening as well. It's the big thing.
Well, it's all the jobs that you told people not to do back in the day, right? Like plumbing, all this stuff. Like I had to do some plumbing the other day, and I'm like, I can do that, but that's the job. Plumbers here said, I mean, you're getting paid like, $200 an hour US. It's not a bad living. And it's kind of crappy living actually, but it's good, it's good money. But yeah, it's funny because you rewind 10 years ago when it was like, everyone needs to learn STEM. Everyone needs to learn to code.
Oh my God, yes.
Now it's been completely flipped on its head. It's just like, what the fuck? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know it's getting late there, dude.
I should go. But hopefully this was useful. I think go look at the JCS stuff. Hopefully I can find something that's easy enough to get into, probably with lots of stories. I think there's a lot there because humans don't change. AI may change quickly, like the capabilities, but assuming that you need to have joint systems with humans, because humans don't change, that's an invariant that you can hang system design principles on, right? And so I've got people in my team who are looking into it, and we are trying to see if we can start experimenting with applying these principles when we're building AI tools internally. Yeah, anyway, anybody else got anything else?
Thanks for hosting this, Cedric. You gave me a book recommendation, which unlocked a few things for me, and thank you so much for that. The one about that the money the monetary policy determines the end of a bubble. That's a valuable idea. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thanks. You're one of the smartest people I know, so it's always good to chat with you, man. So yeah, you're awesome. So
Bye, Eric. Bye, Jenna.
in the UK or something like that. You're on anyway.
Misia, I
Yes,
pronounce.
from Europe. It's 5 p.m.
And
for
Steven.
me. It's pretty.
All right.
Cheers. It was a pleasure.
Bye, Joe. Thank you
Bye.
for
Bye.
suggesting this. Bye-bye.